I would encourage more reporting on is Trump in some state of decline? I think that's a fair question to ask of any 78-year-old.
That is a fair question.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's absolutely a fair question. And look, I mean, one of the reasons why Trump gets upset with yours truly is because I have been raising that question for a while.
Well, this is stunning. There was a rare flash of fairness from none other than Megyn Kelly, former Fox News host and right-wing commentator who openly supports Donald Trump, when she admitted during a recent interview that there are legitimate questions to ask about Trump's cognitive state and seemed to agree that the media should be asking those questions and more frequently. But before we unpack all that, if you end up liking this video and you want to support the channel, please be sure to hit the like, subscribe, and alert bells before you go. All right, friends, we have several clips to talk about in this video. Megyn Kelly is somebody that we've talked about before on this channel, her interactions with Bill Maher, her conversation with David Pakman and others. She used to be a professional journalist, certainly right-wing and certainly conservative, but ever since she's become kind of her own independent right-wing political commentator on YouTube, she has just, increasingly corroded her journalistic credibility. But every now and then she does have a flash of fairness. The old Megyn Kelly emerges where she will occasionally criticize Donald Trump and the Republican Party, even though she is ideologically predisposed to grade them on a curve. And so she recently had a conversation with perhaps the most, famous election forecaster in America, Nate Silver, formerly of 538, when the topic of Trump's cognitive state came up. And what she said may surprise you.
Do you think there's a chance they actually might sub out Biden before November so she could run as an incumbent?
I mean, I don't know that we can connote an advantage to her. It would certainly make her campaigning schedule more difficult. But I do think there's a chance, just because if you look, I spend a lot of time looking at curves, right? Curves for how baseball players are going to do or how the polls are trending. And the trajectory for Biden is, seems to be pretty negative. That instead of an occasional senior moment, that's kind of like the norm now. And we also know, if you look at actuarial tables or if you've just had older relatives, that once you kind of hit the late 70s, early 80s, that you often hit an inflection point where someone goes from having good days most of the time to bad days most of the time. And so, yeah, I mean, the fact that he wanted to be president for another 4 years, if you extend out that curve, I mean, that was, kind of an untenable ask of voters. It's the main reason that he was losing. But it's a perfectly logical question to ask, why not just step aside now? I think that's perfectly logical, and the media should ask that question more and ask questions about Trump. Again, I would encourage more reporting on is Trump in some state of decline? I think that's a fair question to ask of any 78-year-old.
That is a fair question.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's absolutely a fair question. And look, I mean, one of the reasons why Trump gets upset with yours truly is because I have been raising that question for a while. And when he has what appear to be senior moments, I will call him out on it, and he doesn't like that. And I can't say that I blame him, but that's my job.
So again, pretty stunning stuff from Megyn Kelly, especially this close to the election, because Donald Trump is the Republican nominee. She is an ever-increasing conservative Republican, very much fixated on niche culture war issues and perfectly willing to ignore all the terrible, stupid, dishonest, un-American, anti-democratic things that Donald Trump has done for the sake of political expedience. I've played in previous videos exchanges that she's had with Bill Maher, who is a centrist who I think gives entirely too much benefit of the doubt to Republicans and conservatives. But even he called her out to her face, despite their friendship, despite their seeming mutual respect, where he's like, your priorities are just ridiculous. You step over, a dollar for the sake of a nickel, right? That's the expression I use. Having said that, though this is kind of stunning given the current timeline and context, it is actually not the first time that Megyn Kelly has publicly criticized Donald Trump's cognitive decline. During the Republican primary, when Trump was being at least nominally challenged by the likes of Ron DeSantis and Vivek Ramaswamy and others whom I'm sure Kelly prefers, she actually spoke publicly on Glenn Beck, a former Fox News host and colleague of hers, radio show, where she also said something pretty similar.
Do you think that Donald Trump has faded from where he was in 2020?
Yeah, I do.
Huh.
I mean, I take him over Joe Biden any day of the week.
Yeah.
I don't think he's going to, fill out this term, never mind a second. But there's no question Trump has lost a step, or multiple steps. he is confusing Joe Biden for Obama. I know he's now saying he intentionally did that. Go back and look at the clips. It wasn't intentional. It was look, any of us could have a slip of the tongue, but it's happening to him repeatedly. The reference about how somebody's going to get us into World War II, confusing countries, confusing cities where he is. It's happening more and more. With all due respect to Trump, this is what happens when you're 77 years old.
Yeah.
Trump seems inhuman, but he's not inhuman. He's a human.
He seems inhuman in so many ways, but certainly not with respect to like superhuman cognition. He's never been particularly intelligent, particularly bright, particularly well-educated on politics. But this is what's interesting. That, of course, that second clip came from a time when President Biden was the presumptive Democratic nominee, and the race was likely to be a contest between Biden and Trump. But again, it was within the Republican primary. Now that the Republican primary is over and Trump is the confirmed Republican nominee, and President Biden is no longer seeking re-election, and Vice President Harris is seeking election instead as the Democratic nominee, things are starting to flip on the subject of mental fitness, as we've discussed. So previously, there was a greater polling perception issue for President Biden. When people would be polled about Biden and Trump, more Americans said that President Biden was mentally unfit to be president than Trump. Now, having said all that, I will remind you before we go into Harris that even when Biden was the nominee, in poll after poll after poll, anywhere from 50 to 65%, depending on the poll and the time, said that Trump was also mentally unfit for president. So he enjoyed an advantage over Biden because the numbers were worse for Biden, but anywhere from half to a majority to a decisive majority of the country thought that Trump was mentally unfit to be president. And that trend seems to be continuing for Trump now, but not for Harris, now that she's the nominee. So Forbes did a bit of a dive on this, or a recent expose on this. In stark contrast with the sentiment surrounding President Biden's mental fitness, 56% of voters polled by Reuters Ipsos said Harris was mentally sharp and able to deal with the challenges to be president, compared to only 49% who said the same thing about Trump. Okay, that's just one poll. So a majority of Americans don't think that Donald Trump is mentally fit to be president. CNN talked about this recently with results from a very high-profile New York Times Siena College poll, which in the past has been pretty brutal towards President Biden. Other personal comparisons with Trump are also benefiting Harris. In a CBS News survey earlier this month, nearly 7 in 10 voters described her as energetic, well above the roughly 6 in 10 who applied that label to Trump. In the New York Times Siena College polls of Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, 3 critical swing states said they both need to try to win. Significantly more voters in each of those swing states described Harris than Trump as intelligent and honest. More voters in each state said that Trump had a clear vision for the country's future. But in all 3, more than half said Harris did as well. Okay, so when it comes to personal attributes like youth and energy and intelligence and mental fitness, the vice president is dominating in the polls. Now, going all the way back to that first Megyn Kelly clip, Nate Silver saying, listen, and Nate Silver is centrist, right? I imagine if you held a gun to his head, he would probably vote Democrat more than Republican. But this is a guy who was a critic and a proponent of President Biden dropping out of the race. So he's not if there is such a thing as a Biden cultist, Nate Silver is not one. But he also said, not only did he support investigation, in terms of like the media, right, probing whether or not President Biden is mentally fit to be office, he says, listen, more people in the media should be talking about that for Trump as well. And so for Megyn Kelly to agree with that is stunning. James Fallow, who I believe is from Media Matters, if I'm not mistaken, I'm sorry, former blue check person and journalist, he's also talking about this on his Substack, which is, again, he's highlighting the asymmetry. So after Donald Trump's disastrous press conferences, his disastrous conversation with Elon Musk, and we're going to do a video about that and the fallout from that because it continues to occur. He's like, these supposed nonpartisan media conglomerates and media interests are actually doing the country a disservice, and they're actually engaging in enormous asymmetry and hypocrisy because they're not covering Trump's cognitive decline to nearly the same extent that they did about President Biden. And in this current race, Trump has taken Biden's place as the candidate with the greatest perceived weakness on that issue. So basically what he's saying is you might be able to square it focusing more on Biden than Trump before, maybe. And that's more generous than I would say, but fair enough. But now that Biden's no longer in the race, Trump is now the oldest presidential nominee in recorded history. He's also the one who's seen as being less mentally fit and intelligent and capable than his counterpart. So then, therefore, shouldn't that focus be on him now? And where is it? Especially after these high-profile blunders, the disastrous, incoherent press conferences, the terrible rambling, conversations with Elon Musk. Where is the focus? And this is further proof of, in my opinion, just a complete undermining of the notion that the mainstream media is in the bag for Democrats. Mainstream media journalists may vote Democrat, but at the end of the day, they will gleefully sacrifice Democrats and the perception of Democrats just to generate clicks and generate more attention to their stories and to avoid being tarred and feathered as part of the liberal media. So I actually agree with Megyn Kelly. I think that not only are there legitimate questions to ask about Trump's mental fitness, I also agree with her and Nate Silver that the media should be covering this a hell of a lot more, which is why we do here, and which is why Megyn Kelly, unfortunately, won't do it. So let me know what you think in the comments.